So last thing for today is we're going to get on to the project management and teamwork intro. So I don't know if we'll have time for Teamwork Tuesday today. Maybe we'll have to start that off next week. That might be the case. The 10 minutes of mic problems at the start were a bit of a problem. But yes. Project management and teamwork introduction. Now this is a pretty short lecture. It's mainly just talking about some principles of group work, and it's actually pretty straightforward, so I'll try and whiz through it a bit. The first question is, what is Agile? So Agile is this word that's like thrown around all the time. You've probably heard of it before, and a handful of you who've heard of it probably are like aware of what it is. But basically, Agile is a philosophy that was kind of developed a while ago, but came into trend, particularly in big software companies who kind of pioneered a lot of it, just in the last like 10 or 15 years. And this is the Agile Manifesto. Now, there's a lot, you probably think about Agile and you think about, I've heard there's like stand-ups and sprints and Scrum Masters and Scrum reviews and product owners and blah, blah, blah. And these are all really relevant things that do actually happen in the workplace. But my general philosophy is that because this is kind of, for many of you, the first time you've programmed in teams, it's better not to overcomplicate it and keep it quite simple in this kind of course, so that hopefully in other courses or just in your own life, you can teach yourself more structure later. It's very hard to teach structure to people who have never had structure before, because most learning happens by contrast, right? So it's very hard for me to tell you what good software group work is when most of you haven't had either good software group work experience or bad software group work experience. But this is the key thing. Manifesto for Agile Software Development. There is a focus on individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Right, so essentially this means that collaboration and working together as a team is more important than specific tools you use. So there's a really human element to this stuff. Working software over comprehensive documentation. So with Agile software development, your focus is always on making sure your software works. And what I mean by that is like pipelines, right? Like in the pipeline, you get the green tick or the red cross. Well, the focus is on making sure that you're always passing the pipeline, even if that means maybe you don't document it. So a classic case, maybe the pipeline's failed, so you need to quickly do some stuff. Don't worry about getting approval and documenting what you're doing. Worry about making sure that the software works. The third part is customer collaboration over contract negotiation. What this means is that this one doesn't really affect you, but rather than kind of sitting down with who you're building software for and figuring out absolutely everything at the start in one big hit and then like going away for like 6 months and building it, is actually focusing more on that ongoing collaborative aspect with who you're building it for. So, have this ongoing dialogue, interacting with them, bringing them along for the ride, making them part of the process. And in the project in this course, that's not really something that you have the scope to do, sadly, because we've had to standardize things. So that one is a little bit meh for the project. And then responding to change over following a plan. And I think this is probably one of the most important things, which is that your focus is on being agile, which is like kind of flexible and lean, and adapting to change rather than like setting up a 12-month plan or a 1-month plan and sticking to it religiously. So, for instance, like, a lot of software teams, including my own in my private work, it's every week we sit down and we say what matters to us this week, and we don't think more than 7 days ahead of time, right? So it's very much trying to respond to change, make sure things are always working. So it's very adaptable. Like, that's why they call it the Agile Manifesto, because it is meant to be it's meant to be a little bit of a reaction to some kind of classical models, which is, where the software engineering life cycle literally happens over 18 months. You do 3 months of requirements, 6 months of like development, and then you test it all at once, and then you've spent, $1 million over 18 months. Now, this slide has an important note, which is while there is value in the items on the right, as in we care about processes, tools, documentation, and following a plan, while we care about that, we're simply saying that we care about the things on the left more. And that's about as much as of pure Agile that we're going to teach you here. Boz says, how do you manage scope creep? That's a good question. So how you manage scope creep, which we'll probably talk about later. Oh, that's gone now. Okay. Thanks, Boz. So this is the Agile Manifesto. You can go read it if you'd like to, but it's pretty straightforward. What we're really interested in is just the general principles of this stuff, right? So it's more a psychology than a particular set of practices. Now, you've probably, if you haven't already, you'll often see Agile compared against the Waterfall method. And the Waterfall method is kind of like the software engineering lifecycle, except the idea is kind of that you start with requirements and then you do this all once, right? You get all the requirements perfect, you get all the design and you get it all perfect, you build it all, you test it all, and then you deploy it and then you're done. Now, there's a lot of reality to say that no one actually there's a lot of evidence to say that no one actually really thinks that this is how it works, even in like big projects like civil engineering and stuff. But Agile methods really try and take the iterative nature of this to the extreme. And what I mean by that is, in your projects, where every week is a new week. We don't want you to plan too much. You can't plan the next 4 weeks. Things are going to change, and it's all just about being adaptable and working together. And this has become really popular in software in particular, because software, I think there's two big things about software. The first one is that software is really malleable, right? Like unlike other forms of engineering and STEM, you can make changes to software really quickly, right? You can respond to needs and changes like that because software doesn't have this physical constraint that other things have. It's very hard for someone manufacturing a plane to kind of be like, oh yeah, we'll just like quickly add some more seats in the plane, right? Whereas in software, it's often the sky's the limit. The second thing I think is that software nowadays tends to be a massive part of consumer products, right? Like most products you consume as software in terms of engineering efforts. And because of that, like software is a very customer focused thing these days. So customers are always wanting new things and different things. So it really pays to be adaptable. And then just last thing here is like the main defining features of Agile are kind of like iterative and incremental, making sure that you get things done quickly, making sure that it's always stable, and being pretty light on documentation. Light on documentation for many of you is still probably going to be heavy on documentation, but it's not meant to be bureaucratic is the point. People aren't meant to waste their whole lives writing 100-page documents to describe the UNSW Dreams app. Okay, so let's actually talk about some Agile practices. And what I mean by this is that we've spent the last 5 or 7 minutes talking about, what does Agile mean philosophically? But now let's actually talk about what it means in practice. Like, what are you actually going to spend your time doing in something like the project when you implement, Agile practices? So this kind of ties into this project management teamwork part of the mark. The first one is stand-ups. Now, the idea of stand-ups is you tend to have them quite often throughout the week. So let's say that every week your team has a meeting where you refresh, you say, what are we trying to get done this week? Who's generally going to be working on what? You go away for that week and do it. But throughout that week, you will often have stand-ups. Now, a kind of classic tech stand-up is something that might happen at 10 or 11 in the morning. All of the engineers, like all 5 engineers in a team, come together. Maybe they meet up in like the lunchroom or someone's office, and they just have a quick chat. They tell people, what did I do in the last day? What am I going to be doing tomorrow? What problems did I face? And it's a way of keeping everyone updated, and it's a way of bringing problems to the group quickly in case someone's like, oh, I can help you with that. Let's chat about that after. The reason they call them stand-ups is because meetings where people stand up tend to happen quicker. So it's meant to be a quick meeting, typically like 10 minutes, 5 minutes, that kind of thing. Now, in reality, because of COVID and online, and this happens in tech companies now too, asynchronous stand-ups are becoming more common. Now, in normal tech companies, it's probably more likely that they have normal stand-ups where everyone comes together at the same time, but they do it online. That's because everyone's working full-time, so everyone should be free at the same time of day. But for teams that kind of work, maybe different time zones, or teams like you, who everyone in your group might not be free at the same time every day, we do asynchronous stand-ups, where essentially, instead of you all coming online and chatting at the same time, it's like over like a 1 or 2 hour window every day, say from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m., everyone just kind of writes their updates inside of a channel or something on Teams. So let's say you create a new channel on your group team called like Stand Up, and every day between 9 and 11, everyone in your group is kind of required to just like do the thing. Be like, this is what I did yesterday, this is what I'm going to do today. And here's the thing, you might actually be really tempted to skip these. Like, you don't have to do them every day, but I would absolutely encourage every group to do them at least 3 times a week, because at the worst case, you're literally sending a message every 2 days. Some people might think, oh, there's no point doing it generally, or there's no point doing it today because I haven't done any work. Well, that's actually a really important thing, because if you haven't done any work, it's important to vocalize it, because it helps you keep perspective over how much you're doing and avoids you kind of hiding behind your procrastination. And it helps your group members stay up to date, because like they might think you're doing something, but if you're not, then it's good for them to know, because maybe you guys might want to rearrange your workloads or something like that. So stand-ups are something we generally expect with the project. The next thing is sprints or iterations. Now, the project is a little bit too short, I think, to talk about sprints or iterations meaningfully. But remember how I said that every week you have this kind of like team meeting where you figure out what you want to do that week, what the big priorities are. That's the place where you tend to do the major resource allocations. Like, okay, you're like, all right, well, how about, like I'll focus more on this week, and then we got this new thing to do. We'll get so-and-so to work on it. This is generally what we would refer to as sprints. And the most we ask you to think about with sprints in this course is I want you to think about every week in this course as a sprint. And what that means is, because a sprint is a week, we want you to spend 1 week. So we want you to spend the start of every week basically just taking time, half an hour meeting, something like that. Sit down and make sure that you are like planning the next week okay. But again, it's very hard to be too specific about this stuff because of the nature of it being, for many people, their first software group work project, and the fact that it's really only 8 weeks for many people. So short story, stand-ups, try and do those at least a few times a week, even if they're asynchronous. For sprints, try and imagine that you are doing like weekly, like we're going to do this week of work, and then next week we're going to do this week of work, and every week you have a kind of meeting that ends one sprint and starts another, where you actually do meet up at the same time, like even if it's just on a call. For many of you it'll be on a call, and you talk about the week of work ahead. So the last 2 things, one of them is the task board. Well, I'm suggesting that just to jump back, your asynchronous meetings should be probably for stand-ups for many of you, and you'd actually have like an MS Teams call once a week, or you chat in your lab is fine too. Though generally I would recommend that groups actually try and like call on a Sunday or Monday morning or something, and then actually use your lab time to work on stuff together, rather than spending all your lab time figuring things out. And Miguel says, so for sprints, you're working out who will do what for that short amount of time. Yeah, you're essentially like, the idea is that once a week you should kind of decide who's working on what and what's happening that week. And then the stand-ups are really just updating each other. So the main tectonic shifts of where your focuses are kind of only happen once a week. Now, the second last thing today is task boards. Sorry, last question. So wouldn't each submission be a sprint? Well, maybe. It's kind of up to you, but like there's enough work to do to say that a meeting a week and trying to keep it like a weekly cadence is probably fine. So I think that's just a good rule to start with. Last thing, we got a few minutes, so I want to rush through this. I'm kind of annoyed at myself that we keep ending up like finishing a few minutes past the hour, because I don't like that very much. It'll get better as the course goes on. It's a very front-heavy course. In all of your GitLab repos is a section called issues. And inside that section called issues is something called boards. And when you click on boards, oh God, sorry, this is a groups board. I forgot about that. But we're here now, and this is a good example. So you have this section called boards in GitLab, and we would like all groups, yes, all groups, at least for iteration 1, to track their tasks. And you can start today. We don't expect you to have done anything on this before today, but we'd like you to track your tasks for iteration 1 on a task board. And what a task board is a really common like agile approach where you essentially just, you have 4 columns typically, which are like open as like, these are all the things we know we have to do eventually. It's kind of sometimes called a backlog, where you just you slap down, like every time someone's like, we should really do this, we should really do that, but you don't actually want to allocate resources to it yet. You don't want anyone to work on it this week. You just put it in open. The to-do column typically consists of everything you and your team want to do this week. And you can actually assign people to things too. So if I click on this, you can see this particular addassumptions.md, it's not actually assigned to someone. So you can actually assign it to someone in your group, like, you know, Hayden in this case. If you guys are watching, you can go and undo that. So that when you go back to your board, this one's actually assigned to Hayden. And then if I say, you know what, I know that I have to do that this week, I'm going to start working on that for the next few days, I move it to the doing column. And this is a way of showing you and your team, because you're all sharing this board together, what you're working on together, like who's actually working on it right now. And then once people are kind of done with it, it becomes closed. So like if I actually finish it and I merge in the merge request, I move it to closed. So typically it's like, it's in to do when you know, like it's in open when it's something that should be done eventually. It becomes in to do once it's something that should be done this week in this sprint. It becomes doing once you're actually starting to write code for it. Think about doing as like when you create the branch for it, and it becomes finished or done or closed when you merge in the pull request. That's the process we want everyone in the cohort to follow. Yeah, I mentioned that we don't expect it for you because students freak out sometimes and they're like, what, you expected us to do this? And it's like, no, we just can't teach everything in week 1, sadly. So this task board is how you should manage things for iteration 1. And you can talk to your tutor about this as much as you want. Ask them questions this week. It's really straightforward. It's like I'm not talking about this not very long. I'm talking about this quickly, not because it's not important, but because it's quite simple. You can create tasks. You add issues. I can create a new issue. I could call it, finish auth login or something like this. I can submit the issue. I can assign it to myself here. And then if I go back to the board again, it's like here, finish auth login. And if I'm finished it, I can finish it. If I want to delete it, I can delete it probably somehow. I don't know how to delete it. Maybe I can't delete it. You wouldn't want to delete stuff yourself. Maybe I've just ruined everything for this team. I'm sorry. You'll figure out how to delete it, no doubt. Yep, that's all good, Miguel. We're pretty much done. The last thing I just want to flag with people, these 2 slides you can read in your own time, but the last important one is meeting minutes. This is literally the last slide we're talking about today. So I mentioned to you that we'd like you to kind of have a meeting once a week where you essentially come together and make sure you're all on the same page about what's happening for the week. Basically, we'd like you to, during that meeting, actually take some meeting minutes. And you can take turns with this. Now, meeting minutes, we're not going to expect a ton from you in this course, but we'd expect you to actually write them down somewhere. And the idea with meeting minutes is very simple. They're just kind of like the key things that happen in a meeting, which are basically, like, when was the meeting, who attended it, did you have any agenda to go through? So typically you'll add the agenda in advance. So this is a screenshot from some weekly meetings I have and some minutes we take. And we have meetings every Friday. And throughout the week, if there are things I want to talk about with the team or they want to talk about with me, we just add them to the agenda here. So these first 3 columns, the date and agenda are kind of done in advance. And then essentially we have this 4th column, which is what you actually add to during the meeting, which is where you just take notes. You literally, you're talking about stuff and you're like, oh, we need to do that or we need to fix that. And you're just taking short notes. This here is a 30-minute meeting. So just for perspective, this is this is all you'd write in 30 minutes. It's not actually a very demanding thing to do. It's just like the key thing. So in here, you generally, you write notes of things that are relevant, and you might also note down what like actions people have. Now in reality, the actions one is maybe less relevant because this is what the task board is for. So you probably don't even need to put any actions here as long as the task board actually reflects that. And Miguel says, is there a thing on GitLab for meeting minutes? Not that I know of, which leads to that important last question, which is, where do we store meeting minutes? And the answer is going to be either, well, I would probably just recommend that you you all just make a Google Doc, or you put it in a shared, like there's 100 ways you could do it. This is the first time we're expecting students to do this. So what I'd probably say is either A, put your meeting minutes in a Google Doc, because Google Docs track history, so your tutor can actually go and check if you've like been making them every week. Or B, put them in Teams chat. Yep. Have a channel in your team, MS Teams, and do a Teams thing there. Or thirdly, add it as another file in the Git repo. We don't really care. Like, you have to understand, from our perspective, all we care about is that we have a way to look at it, and that we have a way to actually see timestamps, right? Because if you just send us like a PDF that's like, here's our meeting minutes for the last 3 weeks, we're just going to think that you like copied it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure with Google Docs they track history, which I don't think you can fudge very easily. You can remove history, but like tutors will just go back through the history to see you actually added week 2 like a week ago kind of thing. So, Google Docs are fine. Anyway, that's pretty much it. I want to wrap it up there. If you have any other questions, just post on the forum. This stuff in this lecture is really simple. There's not a lot to it. Next week, have a think about what you want to talk about for Teamwork Tuesday. We'll do that one next week. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We got 8. Oh no, we have 8 weeks of lectures. We'll double up 1 week. But anyway, we can talk about that next week. So thanks everyone for coming. I'll make another poll here for those that are hanging around for the last 5 minutes. But that's pretty much it on Agile. And we can keep talking about this as the course goes on.